Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 8 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-400 Microsoft Certified DevOps Engineer Expert exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 8. Question number 312. Scenario. A globally distributed engineering organization requires a collaboration platform that provides persistent project channels, desktop and mobile clients, guest access for suppliers, and direct integration with Azure DevOps. Which application should the organization use? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Project. Option B, Bamboo. Option C, Microsoft Teams. Option D, Microsoft Link. The correct answer is option C, Microsoft Teams. Here's why. Microsoft Teams provides persistent channels, cross-platform clients, guest access, chat history, and integrations with Azure boards, Azure repos, and Azure pipelines. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft Project is a project planning application rather than a persistent team chat platform. B. Bamboo is a build and deployment server. D. Microsoft Link is a retired communications product and does not provide the required current Azure DevOps integration model. Exam tip. Use Teams for channel-based collaboration and the specialized Azure DevOps apps for work item, repository, and pipeline notifications. Question number 313. Scenario. A platform team must select a release strategy for each application delivery requirement. Complete each deployment strategy recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Release software gradually to user groups ordered by their tolerance for risk by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are blue-green deployment, feature flags, or progressive exposure. Statement 2. Deploy code now, but activate its functionality during a later release by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are progressive exposure, feature flags, or blue-green deployment. Statement 3. Keep the previous production environment available for immediate traffic restoration by using the blank. The choices for Statement 3 are feature flags, blue-green deployment, or progressive exposure. For Statement 1, the correct selection is progressive exposure. Ordered cohorts or rings reduce risk by exposing the version gradually. For Statement 2, the correct selection is feature flags. A flag allows deployed functionality to remain disabled until the release decision. For Statement 3, the correct selection is blue-green deployment. 2 complete environments support rapid cutover and rollback. Exam tip. Progressive exposure controls audience. Feature flags control functionality, and blue-green controls environment cutover. Question number 314. Scenario. A repository contains a local configuration file named local.settings.json that must not be included in future Git commits. The file has not yet been committed. Select and order the 3 actions required to configure Git to ignore the file. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Run git commit to commit the ignore configuration. Item 2. Delete and recreate the repository. Item 3. Add local.settings.json to the .gitignore file. Item 4. Run git reflog expire. Item 5. Run git add.gitignore. The correct sequence is as follows. First, add local.settings.json to the .gitignore file. Second, run git add.gitignore. Third, run git commit to commit the ignore configuration. Here's why. Git must first be told which path to ignore. The updated .gitignore file must then be staged and committed so every repository user receives the rule. Exam tip. A .gitignore rule affects untracked files. An already tracked secret or configuration file must also be removed from the Git index. Question number 315. Scenario. An Azure DevOps project named Retail Platform contains Azure pipelines connected to GitHub repositories. A Microsoft Teams channel must receive Azure Pipelines notifications that can be filtered to failed runs. Complete the Azure Pipelines app command that subscribes the channel to the project's pipelines. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Use the Azure Pipelines app action the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are sign in, subscriptions, subscribe, or feedback. Statement 2. Supply the Azure DevOps URL the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are https://dev.azure.com/fabricam/retail-platform/packaging, https://dev.azure.com/fabricam/retail-platform/build, https://dev.azure.com/fabricam/retail-platform/work-items, or https://dev.azure.com/fabricam/retail-platform/. For Statement 1, the correct selection is subscribe. The subscribe command links the team's channel to pipeline notifications. For Statement 2, the correct selection is https://dev.azure.com/fabricam/retail-platform/build. The build URL identifies the project's Azure Pipelines area. Exam tip: subscribe the team's channel to the pipeline first, then refine the subscription to the required build events and outcome filters. Question number 316. Scenario: a classic Azure release pipeline must deploy an IIS application to 4 Windows virtual machines. The machines will be managed as a deployment group. Select and order the 4 actions required to configure and execute the deployment. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Add and configure a deployment group job in the release pipeline. Item 2. Install and register the Azure Pipelines agent on the target virtual machines. Item 3. Execute the release pipeline. Item 4. Create an unrelated build agent pool. Item 5. Create the deployment group. Item 6. Install the Puppet agent extension on the virtual machines. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create the deployment group. Second, install and register the Azure Pipelines agent on the target virtual machines. Third, add and configure a deployment group job in the release pipeline. Fourth, execute the release pipeline. Here's why. The deployment group must exist before target agents can register with it. The pipeline job then targets that group, and the release can execute on the registered machines. Exam tip: a deployment group represents registered target machines. It is different from an agent pool used to execute ordinary build jobs. Question number 317. Scenario: a release pipeline deploys ARM templates that reference secrets in an existing Azure Key Vault. The vault currently uses the legacy access policy authorization model for data plane operations. Permissions must follow least privilege. Drag the appropriate authorization mechanism to each requirement. Each mechanism may be used once, more than once, or not at all. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Azure Role-Based Access Control. Source item 2. A Key Vault Access Policy. Source item 3. An Azure DevOps Personal Access Token. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. Control who can delete the Key Vault resource. Destination B. Control which deployment identity can read secrets from the vault. The first correct mapping is Azure Role-Based Access Control, mapped to control who can delete the Key Vault resource. The second correct mapping is a Key Vault Access Policy, mapped to control which deployment identity can read secrets from the vault. Here's why. Deleting the vault is an Azure Resource Management operation controlled through Azure RBAC. Reading secrets is a Key Vault data plane operation controlled by the configured access policy model. Exam tip: distinguish management plane permissions on the vault resource from data plane permissions on secrets, keys, and certificates. Question number 318. Scenario: an ARM template and its parameter definitions are stored in a GitHub repository. An Azure release pipeline must deploy the resources represented by the template. Select and order the 3 actions required to configure the deployment. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Add an Azure Resource Group deployment task. Item 2. Create an unrelated package. Item 3. Configure the template and deployment parameter values in the task. Item 4. Create the release pipeline. Item 5. Create a new agent executable. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create the release pipeline. Second, add an Azure Resource Group deployment task. Third, configure the template and deployment parameter values in the task. Here's why. The pipeline provides the release workflow. The Azure Resource Group deployment task executes the ARM deployment, and its inputs identify the template, scope, deployment mode, and parameter values. Exam tip. A declarative Azure deployment requires a pipeline, an ARM or bicep deployment task, and correctly scoped template inputs. Question number 319. Scenario. An Azure SQL database supports an internet-facing application. The security team wants automated detection and alerting for anomalous database activity that can indicate SQL injection attempts. Which Azure capability should the team enable? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Defender for SQL. Option B, transparent data encryption. Option C, dynamic data masking. Option D, Azure SQL database automatic tuning. The correct answer is option A, Microsoft Defender for SQL. Here's why. Microsoft Defender for SQL analyzes database activity and generates security alerts for anomalous behavior and potential threats, including suspicious queries associated with SQL injection attempts. Why are the other options not correct? B. Transparent data encryption protects stored database files but does not detect malicious query behavior. C. Dynamic data masking limits exposure of query results and does not detect attacks. D. Automatic tuning optimizes indexes and execution plans. Exam tip. Use secure application coding and parameterized queries to prevent SQL injection. Use Defender for SQL to detect and alert on suspicious database activity. Question number 320. Scenario. An Azure DevOps organization uses 5 self-hosted agents that can access an on-premises file share. Several independent jobs are frequently queued even though multiple agents are idle. The organization currently has only the free self-hosted parallel job entitlement. What should the organization do to increase concurrent job execution? The available options are as follows. Option A, move the jobs to Microsoft-hosted agents. Option B, register more self-hosted agents without changing the parallel job entitlement. Option C, purchase additional self-hosted parallel jobs. Option D, purchase Microsoft-hosted parallel jobs. The correct answer is option C, purchase additional self-hosted parallel jobs. Here's why. The 5 agents provide execution capacity, but the parallel job entitlement limits how many jobs Azure DevOps can dispatch concurrently. Additional self-hosted parallel jobs allow more of the existing agents to run jobs simultaneously. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft-hosted agents cannot necessarily access the private on-premises file share. B. More agents do not increase concurrency when the parallel job entitlement remains the bottleneck. D. Microsoft-hosted parallel jobs apply to Microsoft-hosted execution rather than the required self-hosted agents. Exam tip. Azure Pipeline's concurrency requires both an available agent and an available parallel job entitlement. Question number 321. Scenario. A React application pipeline spends several minutes installing an unchanged JavaScript toolchain and package set during every execution. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution reduces the repeated setup time. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Run the job in a version custom container image that already contains the required JavaScript packages and build tools. Statement 1. Run the job in a version custom container image that already contains the required JavaScript packages and build tools. The answer is yes. Starting from a prepared image reduces recurring environment setup time. Exam tip. Use immutable container images for stable toolchains and pipeline caching for dependencies that change frequently. Question number 322. Scenario. A legacy AKS provisioning workflow must integrate a new cluster with a Microsoft intratenant and then authorize tenant identities through Kubernetes or BAC. Select and order the 3 objects or configurations required by the workflow. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Create a Kubernetes RBAC binding that references the authorized tenant identity. Item 2. Create an application registration in the Microsoft intratenant. Item 3. Create a separate system-assigned managed identity before creating any Azure resource. Item 4. Provision the AKS cluster with the tenant integration. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create an application registration in the Microsoft intratenant. Second, provision the AKS cluster with the tenant integration. Third, create a Kubernetes RBAC binding that references the authorized tenant identity. Here's why. The legacy integration requires the tenant-side application identity before cluster creation. After the cluster exists, Kubernetes RBAC can bind the required role to the tenant identity. Exam tip. Authentication establishes identity. Kubernetes RBAC bindings determine what an authenticated identity can do inside the cluster. Question number 323. Scenario. Commits in an Azure repo's Git repository are associated with Azure Boards work items. A classic build and release workflow must automatically add deployment information to those associated work items. Which release pipeline configuration should the team modify? The available options are as follows. Option A. The pipeline integration options. Option B. The post-deployment approval timeout. Option C. An agentless delay job. Option D. The project's service hook subscriptions. The correct answer is option A. The pipeline integration options. Here's why. The release pipeline integration settings can report deployment status to Azure Boards work items associated with the commits included in the release. Why are the other options not correct? B. A post-deployment approval controls authorization after deployment and does not create work item deployment links. C. An agentless job does not automatically provide work item traceability. D. Service hooks notify external systems, but are not required for the built-in deployment status integration. Exam tip. Enable built-in work item and deployment integration when traceability must connect commits, builds, releases, and deployed environments. Question number 324. Scenario. A legacy Azure DevOps deployment authenticates to an AKS cluster by using a Kubernetes service account. The pipeline will deploy the application by using Helm. Select and order the 3 required actions. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Add a Docker Compose task to the deployment pipeline. Item 2. Create a Kubernetes service account in the cluster. Item 3. Add a Helm package and deploy task to the pipeline. Item 4. Configure the required Kubernetes RBAC role and binding for the service account. Item 5. Add an Azure Function app for containers task. Item 6. Create an unrelated Microsoft Intra application. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create a Kubernetes service account in the cluster. Second, configure the required Kubernetes RBAC role and binding for the service account. Third, add a Helm package and deploy task to the pipeline. Here's why. The service account must exist before a role binding can grant it permissions. The pipeline can then use the authorized Kubernetes identity to deploy the Helm chart. Exam tip. A Kubernetes deployment identity requires both authentication material and an RBAC binding before a pipeline can deploy cluster resources. Question number 325. Scenario. A DevOps engineer is migrating a classic release pipeline to an Azure Pipelines YAML pipeline. The deployment targets production servers and must require a human manager to approve the rollout before the deployment job begins. Select and arrange the 3 required actions in the correct order. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Create an environment in Azure Pipelines. Item 2. Configure approvals and checks on the environment to require the manager's approval. Item 3. Reference the environment in the YAML Pipelines deployment job. Item 4. Create a classic deployment group. Item 5. Add a manual validation at 0 task to a standard YAML job. The correct sequence is 1. Create an environment in Azure Pipelines. 2. Configure approvals and checks on the environment to require the manager's approval. 3. Reference the environment in the YAML pipelines deployment job. Here's why. In YAML pipelines, manual approvals are decoupled from the pipeline code itself. You must create the environment in the Azure DevOps portal, assign the approval check to it, and then target that environment within a deployment job in the YAML file to trigger the human governance step. Exam tip. Unlike classic release pipelines, YAML deployment approvals are managed as metadata on the target environment or service. Question number 328. Scenario. A private Azure DevOps project contains a code wiki. A documentation lead must be able to publish a repository as a code wiki. A developer must be able to edit existing wiki pages. Permissions must follow least privilege. Drag the appropriate default project group to each user. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Contributors. Source item 2. Project administrators. Source item 3. Build administrators. Source item 4. Project valid users. Source item 5. Stakeholders. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. Documentation lead who must publish the code wiki. Destination B. Developer who must edit wiki pages. The first correct mapping is contributors, map to developer who must edit wiki pages. The second correct mapping is project administrators, map to documentation lead who must publish the code wiki. Here's why. Publishing code as a wiki requires repository creation or equivalent administrative permission available by default to project administrators. Contributors can edit wiki pages without receiving project administration privileges. Exam tip. Creating or publishing a wiki repository requires broader permissions than contributing to pages in an existing wiki. Question number 329. Scenario. A release engineer must create an annotated Git tag named version 4.0. The tag must retain the tagger's identity, email, date, and the message release version 4.0. Complete the Git command. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Use Git the blank to create the release reference. The choices for Statement 1 are commit, tag, push, or add. Statement 2. Use the blank to create an annotated tag. The choices for Statement 2 are M, B, A, or C. Statement 3. Use the blank to provide the annotation message. The choices for Statement 3 are C, A, M, or B. For Statement 1, the correct selection is tag. The git tag command creates and manages git tags. For Statement 2, the correct selection is A. The option creates an annotated rather than lightweight tag. For Statement 3, the correct selection is M. The M option supplies the tag message. Exam tip. An annotated tag stores tagger identity, date, and message. A lightweight tag is only a reference to a commit. Question number 330. Scenario. Two Azure pipelines use YAML deployment jobs. Service 1 runs on a fixed set of Azure virtual machines. Each iteration must replace only part of the existing instances until all instances run the new version. Service 2 runs on AKS. A limited deployment must be validated before the new version is expanded to more users. Select the appropriate YAML deployment strategy for each application. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Configure Service 1 with the blank strategy. The choices for Statement 1 are run once, canary, or rolling. Statement 2. Configure Service 2 with the blank strategy. The choices for Statement 2 are rolling, run once, or canary. For Statement 1, the correct selection is rolling. Rolling deployment updates a fixed set of targets incrementally and minimizes downtime. For Statement 2, the correct selection is canary. Canary deployment validates limited exposure before increasing rollout. Exam tip. Use rolling for incremental replacement of instances and canary for progressive validation of a new version. Question number 331. Scenario. A legacy Azure automation runbook creates Microsoft entry user accounts by invoking cmdlets from the Azure AD PowerShell module. The automation account does not currently contain that module. What should the administrator do before running the runbook? The available options are as follows. Option A. Import the Azure AD PowerShell module into the automation account. Option B. Install the Azure Pipelines agent in the automation account. Option C. Add a Microsoft-hosted build agent to the runbook. Option D. Configure an Azure DevOps variable group. The correct answer is Option A. Import the Azure AD PowerShell module into the automation account. Here's why. Azure Automation Runbooks can invoke cmdlets only when the required module is available in the automation account's runtime environment. Why are the other options not correct? B. An Azure Pipelines agent does not provide modules to an automation runbook. C. Microsoft-hosted build agents execute Azure Pipelines jobs, not automation runbooks. D. An Azure DevOps variable group stores pipeline values and does not install PowerShell cmdlets. Exam tip. Every runbook dependency must be imported into the correct automation runtime environment and compatible with its PowerShell version. Question number 332. Scenario. Pull requests to the main branch of an Azure repos repository must satisfy two conditions before merging. The committed application must compile successfully. Sonar Cloud must report a pass quality gate. Drag the appropriate branch policy type to each requirement. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, a build validation policy. Source item 2, a status check policy. Source item 3, a check-in policy. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, verify that the committed code compiles successfully. Destination B, require a passed Sonar Cloud Quality Gate result. The first correct mapping is a build validation policy, mapped to verify that the committed code compiles successfully. The second correct mapping is a status check policy, mapped to require a passed Sonar Cloud Quality Gate result. Here's why. Build validation queues the selected pipeline and requires it to succeed before merging. Sonar Cloud publishes an external pull request status that a status policy can require. Exam tip. Use build validation for pipeline execution and status policies for required results published by external services. Question number 333. Scenario. An organization must identify prohibited open source libraries and license policy violations while developers are building and validating application changes. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution satisfies the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Perform the first dependency and license evaluation as a pre-deployment release gate. Statement 1. Perform the first dependency and license evaluation as a pre-deployment release gate. The answer is no. The control is too late to identify prohibited dependencies as they enter the codebase. Exam tip. Shift software composition and license scanning into pull requests and CI, while retaining deployment gates for final compliance enforcement when required. Question number 334. Scenario. An Azure pipeline produces application artifacts that must be deployed to servers located on a private on-premises network. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution satisfies the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Deploy an Octopus deploy server, install a polling tentacle on the on-premises target, and invoke the Octopus deployment from the Azure pipeline. Statement 1. Deploy an Octopus deploy server, install a polling tentacle on the on-premises target, and invoke the Octopus deployment from the Azure pipeline. The answer is yes. The design provides a reachable deployment orchestrator and an on-premises agent that retrieves and applies the release. Exam tip. For private deployment targets, use an agent or deployment worker with network access to the target and prefer outbound polling when inbound connectivity is restricted. Question number 335. Scenario. Windows event data from several virtual machines is stored in an Azure Monitor Logs workspace. An operations team must return one row per computer containing a dynamic array of the distinct event IDs generated during the previous 12 hours. Drag the appropriate KQL fragment to each query position. Each source item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Event. Source item 2. Where time generated ago, 12H. Source item 3. Summarize make_set, event ID, by computer. Source item 4. Order by time generated desk. Source item 5. MV expand event ID. Source item 6. Project computer, event ID. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. First query line. Destination B. Second query line. Destination C. Third query line. The first correct mapping is event, mapped to first query line. The second correct mapping is where time generated ago, 12H, mapped to second query line. The third correct mapping is summarize make_set, event ID, by computer, mapped to third query line. Here's why. The event table contains Windows events. The where operator limits records to the previous 12 hours, and make_set returns a dynamic array containing distinct event ID values for each computer group. Exam tip. Use summarize with make_set when each group must return a collection of distinct values. Question number 336. Scenario. A globally accessible ASP.NET Core application runs in Azure. Operations must test its public URL every 5 minutes from selected Azure locations and generate an alert when the application is unavailable. The solution should require no custom monitoring code. Which monitoring capability should the team configure? The available options are as follows. Option A, an Azure Service Health Regional Alert. Option B, an Application Insights Availability Test and Alert. Option C, an Azure function deployed to every test region. Option D, an App Service Activity Log Alert. The correct answer is option B, an Application Insights Availability Test and Alert. Here's why. Application Insights Availability Monitoring can execute scheduled HTTP tests from selected Azure locations and generate alerts when the endpoint fails. Why are the other options not correct? A. Service Health reports Azure Platform incidents and does not test the application URL. C. Custom regional functions introduce unnecessary development and maintenance. D. The activity log records Azure management operations rather than external application availability. Exam tip. Use Application Insights availability tests for synthetic endpoint monitoring from multiple locations. Question number 337. Scenario. An engineering manager is implementing a dashboard to monitor DevOps flow metrics based on the DORA, DevOps Research and Assessment framework. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate metric. Statement 1. The metric that measures how frequently a team successfully releases code to production is the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are deployment frequency, lead time for changes, or cycle time. Statement 2. The metric that measures the time required to restore service after a production failure is the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are time to restore service, change failure rate, or mean time to detect. For Statement 1, the correct selection is deployment frequency. This is a primary DORA throughput metric. For Statement 2, the correct selection is time to restore service. This is a primary DORA stability metric. Exam tip. DORA metrics balance velocity, deployment frequency, lead time for changes against stability, change failure rate, time to restore service. Question number 338. Scenario. A Git repository contains the production source for a large application. A development team must isolate work for one new feature and merge the work after it is completed and validated. Complete the branching model recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. The branch should be the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are long-lived or short-lived. Statement 2. The branch should be the blank branch. The choices for Statement 2 are main, feature, or integration. For Statement 1, the correct selection is short-lived. Short branch lifetimes encourage frequent integration and reduce merge complexity. For Statement 2, the correct selection is feature. A feature branch isolates implementation of the new functionality. Exam tip. Use short-lived feature branches when independent work must be isolated without creating permanent branch divergence. Question number 339. Scenario. A development team delivers features slowly because the application contains substantial technical debt. For the statement, select yes if the recommendation helps reduce the technical debt. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Increase code duplication so that each module contains its own copy of shared logic. Statement 1. Increase code duplication so that each module contains its own copy of shared logic. The answer is no. Additional duplication increases rather than reduces technical debt. Exam tip. Reduce duplication by consolidating stable, shared behavior into maintainable components or packages. Question number 340. Scenario. An Azure DevOps project will associate an automated test with an Azure Test Plans test case. The automated test has not yet been created, and the project assets must be placed under source control before the association is completed. Select and order the 3 preparation actions. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Create a test project containing the automated test. Item 2. Debug an unrelated production deployment. Item 3. Create the test casework item that will receive the association. Item 4. Commit the test project to the Azure DevOps repository. Item 5. Add the test to a release deployment group. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create a test project containing the automated test. Second, commit the test project to the Azure DevOps repository. Third, create the test casework item that will receive the association. Here's why. The automated test method and its test project must exist and be available to the Azure DevOps project. A test casework item provides the work item identifier to which the automated test is associated. Exam tip. Automated test traceability requires both discoverable test code and a test casework item. Question number 341. Scenario. A platform team wants to use Azure machine configuration to audit the operating system settings of an on-premises Linux server. The server currently operates outside of Azure and has no Azure-related agents installed. Select and order the 3 actions required to evaluate the server's configuration using Azure machine configuration. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Onboard the Linux server as an Azure Arc-enabled server. Item 2. Assign a machine configuration policy definition to the server. Item 3. Review the server's compliance status in the guest assignments or Azure policy dashboard. Item 4. Install the legacy PowerShell DSC extension for Linux. Item 5. Generate a local configuration manager, LCM, meta configuration. Item 6. Export an Azure Resource Manager template from the server. The correct sequence is as follows. First, onboard the Linux server as an Azure Arc-enabled server. Second, assign a machine configuration policy definition to the server. Third, review the server's compliance status in the guest assignments or Azure policy dashboard. Here's why. Azure Machine Configuration manages guest operating systems natively in Azure. For non-Azure machines, the server must first be projected as an Azure resource by installing the Azure Arc Connected Machine Agent. Once onboarded, Azure Policy can assign machine configuration definitions to the server, and its compliance state is reported back to the Azure portal. Exam tip. To manage and audit on-premises or multi-cloud servers using Azure Machine Configuration, you must first onboard them to Azure Arc. Question number 342. Scenario. A legacy application has tightly coupled components and several circular dependencies. These design problems make enhancements slow and risky. For the statement, select yes if the recommendation helps reduce technical debt. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Refactor the application to reduce coupling and remove unnecessary dependency cycles. Statement 1. Refactor the application to reduce coupling and remove unnecessary dependency cycles. The answer is yes. The refactoring directly improves maintainability and reduces architectural debt. Exam tip. Technical debt commonly increases with tight coupling, cycles, duplication, excessive complexity, and inadequate automated tests. Question number 343. Scenario. An organization must detect prohibited open-source libraries and license policy violations while developers build and validate changes. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution satisfies the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Add automated dependency and license security testing to pull request validation and continuous integration. Statement 1. Add automated dependency and license security testing to pull request validation and continuous integration. The answer is yes. The scanning executes during development and detects the specified dependency governance issues. Exam tip. Use software composition analysis for third-party dependency vulnerabilities and license compliance. Question number 344. Scenario. An organization must identify prohibited libraries and open-source license violations as dependencies enter the development workflow. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution satisfies the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Enable continuous deployment without adding a dependency or license scanner. Statement 1. Enable continuous deployment without adding a dependency or license scanner. The answer is no. A deployment trigger provides no software composition analysis. Exam tip. CI/CD provides the automation framework. Specialized scanners provide the security and compliance evaluation. Question number 345. Scenario. A release pipeline has created an Azure Container Instances container that runs OWASP ZAP and uses an Azure file share for its report. The remaining workflow must execute the baseline scan, publish the findings as pipeline test results, and remove the temporary container. Select and order the 5 remaining actions. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Convert the downloaded ZAP report to a supported test result format. Item 2. Build a new virtual machine image. Item 3. Download the generated report from the file share. Item 4. Publish the converted test results. Item 5. Install an unrelated Docker CLI extension. Item 6. Run the OWASP ZAP baseline scan. Item 7. Delete the temporary OWASP ZAP container. The correct sequence is as follows. First, run the OWASP ZAP baseline scan. Second, download the generated report from the file share. Third, convert the downloaded ZAP report to a supported test result format. Fourth, publish the converted test results. Fifth, delete the temporary OWASP ZAP container. Here's why. The scan must produce a report before it can be downloaded. Azure Pipelines requires the report in a supported test result format before publishing, and the temporary container should be removed after result processing. Exam tip. A dynamic security testing workflow should provision the scanner, execute the scan, normalize and publish findings, and remove temporary infrastructure. Question number 346. Scenario. Developers maintain packages in an Azure Artifacts feed. They must be able to publish packages and mark obsolete versions as deprecated or unlisted. They must not manage feed permissions, delete packages permanently, or change upstream source settings. Which feed role provides the required least privilege? The available options are as follows. Option A, feed and upstream reader. Option B, feed publisher. Option C, feed owner. The correct answer is option B, feed publisher. Here's why. Feed publisher, formerly called contributor, can publish, promote, deprecate, unlist, or yank package versions without receiving feed owner permissions. Why are the other options not correct? A. Feed and upstream reader can consume packages and save packages from upstream sources, but cannot publish or deprecate packages. C. Feed owner can delete packages, manage feed settings, permissions, and upstream sources, which exceeds the requirement. Exam tip. Use feed publisher for package lifecycle operations and feed owner only for feed administration. Question number 347. Scenario. An Azure DevOps project named Commerce Platform contains several Git repositories. A Slack channel must receive notifications when pull requests are created in any Git repository in the project. Complete the Azure repos Slack command. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Use the command action the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are feedback, subscribe, subscriptions, or sign-in. Statement 2. Supply the URL the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are https://dev.azure.com/fabricam/commerce-platform/core-API, https://dev.azure.com/fabricam/commerce-platform, or https://dev.azure.com/fabricam/commerce-platform/core-DB. For Statement 1, the correct selection is subscribe. The action creates an Azure repos subscription in the Slack channel. For Statement 2, the correct selection is https://dev.azure.com/fabricam/commerce-platform/. The project URL supports monitoring all Git repositories in the project. Exam tip. Use a project URL for project-wide repository subscriptions and a repository URL for one repository. Question number 348. Scenario. An Azure Monitor metric alert monitors a virtual machine. The evaluation frequency is already set to 1 minute. The alert must fire when average CPU usage is greater than 70% over the previous 5 minutes. Complete the alert condition. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Set the aggregation granularity to the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are 1 minute or 5 minutes. Statement 2. Set the threshold type to the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are dynamic or static. Statement 3. Set the comparison operator to the blank. The choices for Statement 3 are greater than or equal to, less than, greater than, or less than or equal to. For Statement 1, the correct selection is 5 minutes. The average must be calculated over the previous 5-minute window. For Statement 2, the correct selection is static. The requirement defines an explicit threshold of 70%. For Statement 3, the correct selection is greater than. The alert should fire only when the average exceeds 70%. Exam tip. Aggregation granularity defines the measurement window. Evaluation frequency defines how often Azure checks the condition. Question number 349. Scenario. A public Azure DevOps project builds an open-source application stored in GitHub. Azure pipelines must publish build status through the GitHub Checks API and operate as an application rather than as an individual developer. Which authentication method should be used? The available options are as follows. Option A, SAML. Option B, a GitHub Personal Access Token. Option C, the Azure Pipelines GitHub app. Option D, OpenID authentication for interactive users. The correct answer is option C, the Azure Pipelines GitHub app. Here's why. The GitHub app provides application-based repository authorization and allows Azure pipelines to publish rich status through the GitHub Checks API. Why are the other options not correct? A. SAML provides user single sign-on and does not authorize pipeline checks API operations. B. A PAT is user-bound and is less appropriate than the application integration. D. OpenID is not the GitHub repository integration mechanism for publishing pipeline checks in this scenario. Exam tip. Use the Azure Pipelines GitHub app for granular application identity and GitHub Checks integration. Question number 350. Scenario. A non-deterministic API performance test sometimes fails and then passes without any related source code or environment change. Until the test can be corrected, the team must prevent the known flaky result from reducing the pipeline's test pass percentage. Which 2 actions should the team perform? Select 2 answers. The available options are as follows. Option A, disable flaky test detection for the project. Option B, mark the test as flaky. Option C, enable test slicing. Option D, exclude flaky tests from the reported test pass percentage. Option E, enable test impact analysis. The correct answers are Option B, mark the test as flaky, and Option D, exclude flaky tests from the reported test pass percentage. Here's why. Marking the test records its non-deterministic status. Excluding flaky tests from the pass percentage calculation prevents the known flaky outcome from incorrectly failing the quality calculation. Why are the other options not correct? A. Disabling flaky test detection removes assistance for identifying non-deterministic tests. C. Test slicing distributes tests but does not change flaky test handling. E. Test impact analysis selects tests affected by code changes and does not classify or exclude the flaky test. Exam tip. Flaky test classification is temporary risk management. The underlying non-determinism should still be corrected. Question number 351. Scenario. An organization is provisioning an AKS cluster. Application images must remain in a private Azure registry, and the cluster requires an Azure-managed identity for operations against Azure resources. Complete the platform design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Store and publish the private container images in the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Azure Container Registry, Azure Container Instances, or a Docker file. Statement 2. Configure the AKS cluster to use the blank for Azure Resource Authentication. The choices for Statement 2 are a Microsoft intragroup, a managed identity, or an Azure automation account. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Azure Container Registry. ACR provides private image repositories and Azure native access control. For statement 2, the correct selection is a managed identity. Managed identity provides Azure managed workload credentials for cluster operations. Exam tip: use ACR for private images and managed identities instead of long-lived service principal secrets when supported. Question number 352. Scenario: a build must start automatically whenever code is pushed to an Azure DevOps repository. For the statement, select yes if the proposed configuration satisfies the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Enable only the batch changes while a build is in progress option without enabling a continuous integration trigger. Statement 1. Enable only the batch changes while a build is in progress option without enabling a continuous integration trigger. The answer is no. The pipeline still requires a CI trigger to start automatically after a push. Exam tip: enable continuous integration first. Use batching only to consolidate commits that arrive while a run is active. Question number 353. Scenario: operations must collect guest operating system telemetry from Windows virtual machines and inventory the processes and network dependencies running inside each machine. Which two monitoring agents provide the required data? Select two answers. The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Monitor Agent. Option B, Azure Network Watcher Agent. Option C, Dependency Agent. Option D, Telegraph Agent. The correct answers are Option A, Azure Monitor Agent, and Option C, Dependency Agent. Here's why. Azure Monitor Agent collects supported guest operating system monitoring data. The Dependency Agent supplies process and connection dependency data used by the VM Insights dependency experience. Why are the other options not correct? B. Azure Network Watcher Agent supports network diagnostics and does not inventory guest processes. D. Telegraph commonly collects metrics on Linux and is not the required Windows VM process dependency agent. Exam tip: guest telemetry collection and process dependency mapping use separate capabilities and should not be confused with network diagnostic agents. Question number 354. Scenario: a classic Azure build pipeline contains one agent job. Inside the job are the following configured tasks: NuGet restore, NuGet tool installation, compile, application copy files, publish artifact. The source checkout operation is configured separately from the task list. Complete the pipeline summary. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. The pipeline contains the blank agent job. The choices for Statement 1 are 1, 2, or 3. Statement 2. The agent job contains the blank configured tasks. The choices for Statement 2 are 4, 5, or 6. For Statement 1, the correct selection is 1. All listed build operations run under one agent job. For Statement 2, the correct selection is 5. NuGet restore, tool installation, compilation, file copy, and artifact publication are 5 tasks. Exam tip: a job is an execution boundary containing steps or tasks. Source checkout may be represented separately from the task list. Question number 355. Scenario: several applications use one Azure SQL logical server. Only the database named OrdersDB must allow Azure SQL database to evaluate query performance and apply supported tuning actions over time. Other databases must retain their existing settings. Which configuration should the database administrator apply? The available options are as follows. Option A. Enable automatic tuning on the logical server and force every database to inherit it. Option B. Enable automatic tuning directly on OrdersDB. Option C. Enable app service automatic scaling. Option D. Configure an Azure Monitor workbook for OrdersDB. The correct answer is Option B. Enable automatic tuning directly on OrdersDB. Here's why. Database-level automatic tuning overrides or avoids server inheritance and limits the tuning behavior to the selected database. Why are the other options not correct? A. Server-level configuration can affect all databases that inherit the setting. C. App service scaling changes application capacity and does not tune SQL queries. D. A workbook visualizes data but does not apply automatic tuning actions. Exam tip. Configure automatic tuning at the database level when the requirement must apply to only one Azure SQL database. Question number 356. Scenario. A company already uses SonarQube to analyze .NET applications. A new Java application uses Gradle and must be compiled and analyzed for code quality in an Azure pipeline. Which build task type should be included in the pipeline? The available options are as follows. Option A, CocoaPods. Option B, Grunt. Option C, Gradle. Option D, Gulp. The correct answer is option C, Gradle. Here's why. The Gradle task builds Gradle-based Java projects and can participate in a SonarQube analysis sequence configured in Azure pipelines. Why are the other options not correct? A. CocoaPods manages Apple platform dependencies. B. Grunt is a JavaScript task runner. D. Gulp is also a JavaScript task runner. Exam tip. Match the pipeline build task to the application's build system and surround it with the required SonarQube preparation and publication steps. Question number 357. Scenario. A platform team must prevent unauthorized changes to Azure DevOps project configuration and identify drift from an approved baseline. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution satisfies the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Run a subscription health scan only when a package is created. Statement 1. Run a subscription health scan only when a package is created. The answer is no. The proposed action is unrelated to project configuration governance. Exam tip. Use permissions, audit logs, policies, and configuration as code practices to govern project configuration. Question number 358. Scenario. A React application pipeline contains one job. Installing npm dependencies consumes 5 minutes during every execution. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution directly reduces the dependency installation time. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Purchase additional parallel job capacity without changing the single job or its dependency restoration process. Statement 1. Purchase additional parallel job capacity without changing the single job or its dependency restoration process. The answer is no. No additional job exists to run concurrently, so dependency restoration still takes the same time. Exam tip. Use caching or prepared environments to accelerate repeated dependency restoration. Parallelism helps only when work can execute concurrently. Question number 359. Scenario. An operations team must run KQL queries over Azure SQL database diagnostic telemetry and create an alert when the observed connection count reaches a defined limit. The design should use a built-in diagnostic destination. Which destination should be configured in the database diagnostic settings? The available options are as follows. Option A. Archive the diagnostics to an Azure storage account. Option B. Send the diagnostics to a log analytics workspace. Option C. Stream the diagnostics only to an event hub. The correct answer is option B. Send the diagnostics to a log analytics workspace. Here's why. Log analytics supports KQL analysis and log alert rules over diagnostic data routed from Azure resources. Why are the other options not correct? A. Storage is suitable for archival, but does not directly provide KQL log alert evaluation. C. Event Hub supports streaming to external consumers, but requires additional processing to implement the requested Azure Monitor log alert. Exam tip. Use log analytics when diagnostic telemetry must be queried with KQL and evaluated by Azure Monitor log alerts. Question number 360. Scenario. A delivery team must select the most appropriate Azure DevOps or Azure Storage service for each development asset. Drag the appropriate service to each asset. Each service may be used once. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Azure Repos. Source item 2. Azure Artifacts. Source item 3. Azure Pipelines. Source item 4. Azure Storage. Source item 5. Azure Test Plans. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, application source code. Destination B, a version library consumed by several applications. Destination C, logs and results generated by automated builds and tests. Destination D, large binary assets that are updated frequently. The first correct mapping is Azure Repos, mapped to application source code. The second correct mapping is Azure Artifacts, mapped to a version library consumed by several applications. The third correct mapping is Azure Pipelines, mapped to logs and results generated by automated builds and tests. The fourth correct mapping is Azure Storage, mapped to large binary assets that are updated frequently. Here's why. Each service is designed for a different asset lifecycle: source history, package versioning, pipeline execution records, or scalable object storage. Exam tip: do not use source control as a package feed, build log archive, or general large binary storage system. You have completed Part 8 of the AZ-400 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.